Good morning, everyone. My name is Vicki DeBlasi. I'm the Head of Marketing at UK 5G. I'm going to be your host this morning. This is the third in a series of 4 events that we're running for place leaders and place makers. And today we are going to be looking at successfully attracting inward investment. So we have got a great agenda lined up for you this morning. We've got Dejan from DCMS, who's going to be giving us the central government perspective on this. Then we've got 2 case studies, Liz from Sunderland City Council and Sarah from Scottish Future Trust, talking about the work that they're doing in Scotland with the Infralink Programme. And we'll then be inviting all of our speakers to a panel session. So we want these sessions to be as interactive as possible and to cover off any questions and all questions that you might have. So if you have any particular burning questions that you're coming into the event today in, or as we go through, as people are presenting, if there are particular questions that you want to ask, stick them in the chat box. We'll be monitoring that throughout, and we'll save all of those up and make sure we cover all of those in the panel session. So please do make advantage of that and leave all of your questions in the chat function. So before we get started with all of that, I'll give you all a quick introduction to UK 5G for those of you who may not be familiar with us. So we are a innovation network that exists to accelerate the adoption and deployment of 5G across all 4 nations. We are funded by DCMS, but we exist as an impartial independent entity. And our work typically focuses around 3 sort of key areas. Firstly is around supporting the development of the ecosystem. So that's both the supply side, so working with the telecoms industry, but also the demand side. So working with industry sectors, places, local central government to make sure that through events like this and other activities that people are aware of what you can do with 5G and perhaps more importantly, how you can actually get it, the nitty-gritty of how you go about deploying it. We work very closely with the various projects that exist within the 5G Testbed and Trials Programme, which is now hitting the scales at over 50 different projects. And we support them with the dissemination of key information, update news and learnings that come out of those for the benefit of the broader ecosystem. And thirdly, we're responsible for promoting our UK capabilities on the international stage. We are a membership-based organisation. If you're not already a member, of course, I will heartily encourage you to sign up. And we have a very active communications engine. So we have regular newsletters, we have a printed magazine, which is sent out on a quarterly basis. And our website is updated on a daily basis with news articles, opinion pieces, resources, guides, assets to keep you updated with everything that's happening both in the UK and overseas, and to help to guide you with your own digital connectivity and infrastructure deployments and plans. We also have 8 working groups which cover a variety of different sort of sectors and interests, the most relevant to today probably being the Connected Places group. And they are responsible for undertaking specific works and activities related to those particular interest groups. Of most relevance to today's group is a new section of the website which we launched towards the tail end of last year called the Place Hub. You can see the URL at the bottom of the slide there. And that is really about gathering all in one place for local authorities, regional authorities and LEPs, details around the what and more importantly, the how of digital connectivity and infrastructure. So in that section of the site, we've categorised all of the 5G projects and pilots that are taking place across the UK so that you can easily find those that are happening in your region. And we also have a section which is dedicated to practical guides, assets and insights related to 4 key areas which local authorities and places told us were important to them. How to effectively engage your local community, all things digital infrastructure, coordination, leadership and execution. So, you know, you've decided what you want to do. How do you actually go about doing it? And fourthly, procurement and partnership. So how do you find private sector partners and how do you effectively work with them? So I'd really encourage you to have a look at that section of the site. We've got guides, toolkits, I think everyone that's speaking today has contributed content to that. We also have on each of those some recorded panel sessions. As you know, reading all the guides in the world is great, but sometimes you just want to hear it directly from the horse's mouth. So we've got you covered on that front as well. Those sections of the website are being constantly updated too. So you know, if you have looked at it before, do keep coming back. There's lots of new content being added all the time. Similarly, if you're sitting here today and thinking, I've got really interesting things that I could share on those topics, please do get in touch. You can contact us at marketing@uk5g.org. We'd love to have a chat. We'd love to kind of share any sort of learnings or processes that you have developed that have worked well within your place. So that's enough from me. Without further ado, I will welcome Dejan, who's going to start us off with talking about the DCMS perspective on all things inward investment.
Thank you very much, Vicky, and good morning, everyone. So if we move on to the first slide. So just a very quick scene setter for this morning around the general conversation around why advanced connectivity, why is that presenting opportunities for inward investment, and how that may actually help regions and local authorities support their economic and growth development plans and social agendas, and generally just promote the regeneration and well-being of a place. It's always the case, we talk about 5G, it's very easy to kind of fall into the technology conversation. And I think one thing that 5G Testbeds and Trial program has done over the last few years is actually to shift that conversation towards use cases. So what do we actually can do with this technology? And I think what's emerging now is actually increased understanding that those use cases do have actually presenting a significant shift in terms of the scale and scope of 5G networks and how that might apply to geography of a place. So if you think about all the use cases that 5G does enable and will enable in the near future, a lot of them very much are rooted in the concept of a location and a place. So if we think about any type of IoT application, we are talking about sensing application when we are measuring environmental factors around the place. We are thinking about movement of people, of goods around campuses or zones. So we think about entertainment venues, we think about business parks, we think about universities. Or we consider the visitors to our places and we think, well, how can we use digital and wireless connectivity to actually enhance that experience? And we talk about virtual reality, augmented reality applications. And more often than not, admittedly not always, but more often than not, that conversation is set in a context of a location. So what we are increasingly seeing is actually that when the conversation then moves into the operational deployment of 5G networks and actually how services are delivered over that network infrastructure, those conversations then tends to be kind of focused on things and places and processes that are actually linked to the place. And that's why we are seeing this emergence of conversations around where is there an alternative model of deployment here, rather than just thinking, is this about national coverage and sort of percentage national coverage? Is this actually about enabling differentiated levels of service as associated with a particular place? And what's particularly interesting right now is actually where's the right point? So if we are kind of moving more to the kind of a localized level of operations of network delivery and network operations and services, is it at the regional level? Is it at the level of a city? Where exactly does it sit? And it's probably going to be one of those classic answers, well, it depends. In some cases, those use cases more lend themselves to the regional applications. So say, for example, transport and smart mobility. Typically, people on a day-to-day basis will commute within the region. So if you think from the user's experience, it's actually a regional perspective. But if you're thinking about applications that are more associated with venues, so sort of sometimes we can call this nomadic connectivity. So if we are visiting a entertainment venue, a stadium, if we are going to university or kind of an innovation zone in our city, then perhaps it's the kind of that city very kind of a localized zoning around the cities. So it's really notable how this kind of extension and the breadth of use cases that 5G enables is actually shifting us to think differently how actually we create the scope and scale around our place. And that scale and scope is important because inevitably, at the end of the day, rolling out networks costs money and requires significant capital investments. And there has to be a return on that investment regardless of who is investing. So whether it's the operators, whether it's the private sector finance, or whether it's public money, whoever goes in there needs to see the sufficient scale in order to move beyond testbed trials and applications into actually commercial rollouts and applicability of services. So if we move to the next slide, Vicki, please. And that idea of a place then leads us to something that for anyone who has been kind of immersed in the concept of smart cities for over the last decade, as it's kind of emerged and evolved, this kind of idea of horizontal, where the city, digital infrastructure of a city becomes a series, it's a kind of a layered horizontals, layered platforms. And this is kind of a very much touches the idea that digital economies generate their scale as platforms. And we don't need to spend much time, but the world today is dominated by a platform-based business models. And this is, again, this is a parallel to that. So if we are thinking about our city, our region, there's emerging thinking and emerging view towards, well, this really, it's not about vertically integrated silos, technology silos of applications. It's actually about creating a shareable infrastructures where you have these kind of horizontal platforms, horizontal layers, where basically you can encourage that sharing and multi-purpose use. And this then links us in some of the kind of what's become a very common language around 5G infrastructure, and not just 5G, but generally wireless networks as well. So we will hear a lot, many conversations about concepts such as neutral hosting, network slicing, et cetera. Well, fundamentally, this is really what they are. This is the application of various network architecture models to this concept of creating connectivity as a platform within a context of a certain geography. And I personally draw the distinction, sort of help my own understanding of this, that neutral host, more often than not for me, is about sharing the physical infrastructure of a network. And that in itself, without going into too much detail, has several nuances around whether it's passive or active sharing of network resources. But on top of that, there is the promise of software-defined networks and various kind of features that kind of are integrated on the back of that into the 5G around core network functionality and this ability to slice virtually slice the network resources and then allocate it effectively as software-defined virtual slices of that capacity. So if we move to the next slide. So if we are talking about shared infrastructure concept, and if we are talking within a context of a place, where place might be a region or a city or any sort of a subdivision of such, then it becomes, the logical conclusion becomes that actually the place, the organizations, the public sector governing the place have actually increasing role to play in this. And that role is fundamentally a role of coordination. It's a coordination between the demand side and the supply side. It's a coordination between users and suppliers of infrastructures. It's a coordination between public and private sector. So any way you slice this supply chain, where the role of a place really delivers value is in that coordination. So if you think about, well, what are then the kind of high-level core ingredients around it, building that case for 5G, for investment into wireless infrastructure in a place? So what needs to be pulled together? And in an essence, it is with any investment case. Is there a demand? What would be the cost to deliver it? And how can you reduce the risk of investment? And what these slides here present is just kind of some of the kind of notable things that the leading places around the UK have done in this regard. So it's in essence, this is an emerging best practice. So if you look at the stimulation of aggregation of demand, it again goes back to that scale. If we are to make shared network infrastructures pay for themselves, we need to have a sufficient demand. We need to have sufficient usage of that. And at the moment, a lot of that demand is a little bit haphazard, it's fragmented between different kind of sort of stakeholder groups. So really, it's about bringing those major enterprises and public stakeholders, if at all possible, committing to the concept of anchor tenancy, which actually worked relatively well for example, in fiber LFFN programs, with sort of that kind of a guaranteed of use just to get things off the ground. And often, discussion here also tends to be about how can we deliver connectivity where in the not spots where it's difficult to get kind of a commercial sector to deliver. So focusing then on creating that demand in places where it currently demands, stimulating, but perhaps creating enterprise innovation zones by stimulating entrepreneurial businesses to locate in certain areas, etc., etc. Second one, this is about cost of rollout and making it easy as possible. Some of you may be aware or involved in the Digital Connectivity Infrastructure Accelerator program. I happen to be one of the joint leads in that program. This is really all about, it's one element of this. It's one element of kind of making it easier for the industry to actually roll out by opening up public sector infrastructure assets for their use. There's a significant opportunity here about simplifying and digitalizing those processes. So, making it just kind of smooth and easy to operate. But also what often comes back as a feedback for basic, engage with the community. Try as much as possible to get community to support this, to get excited about this, to see and understand the opportunity around better connectivity. And finally, and this I will kind of stop at this, my last kind of a couple of comments to make. Reducing the risk in investment, again, something that we are seeing quite often now emerging from this is connectivity as being a key pillar of local growth and economic development plans. It's almost essential to get both that kind of a political as well as kind of economic support across the region for what we're trying to do here. Developing the clear proposition that has a return for investment, and then co-investing. And there is a meaningful opportunity to co-invest through various channels, whether it's growth deals, regional development funds, whether it's through newly set up UK infrastructure bank, etc., etc. So in a sense, it almost feels that there's no shortage of investment potential there, but it's about making that investable proposition work in the first place. And I'll stop there. Thank you, Vicki.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dejan. Really helpful kind of starting point for us. And just email contact details on the screen if anybody wants to pick up with Dejan directly there. So we'll move now to looking at case studies and two examples of places who are successfully kind of tackling this meaty topic. So first up, I'd like to welcome Liz St. Louis from Sunderland City Council to talk about the work that she has been doing and leading in Sunderland. Liz, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vicki, and thanks, Dejan, for that great presentation. As you were going through that, I was giving myself a number of green ticks. So we've been following through on some of those, so hopefully people will see a number of synergies with what I'm about to say in the journey that we've been on. So great to be here this morning. Just moving on to the next slide, Vicki, if we can. Just to give you a little bit of background, really, in terms of where we started. We started our journey back in the spring of 2019. We'd launched a new city plan, which the vision of that was by 2030, Sunderland will be a connected international city with opportunities for all. And it was really that word connected that started our digital connectivity journey. And when we started, we brought together, we knew we couldn't do this on our own as just one local authority. So we brought together a whole host of our city partners representing the health, the education, the business sectors. And we spent 2 full days at Sunderland University in a workshop when we could actually all get together and debate these things. Just before, obviously, the events of the last couple of years happened, but it was a great 2 days, a great investment of time, and we came together and we came out of there with a shared vision around what we wanted to achieve as a smart city, around how we wanted to achieve our digital ambitions, what was important to us as individual organisations, as a collective in the city, but what we all absolutely signed up to was that next generation fibre and mobile infrastructure was absolutely required throughout the city so that we could deliver those benefits to Sunderland residents, to Sunderland businesses, and to the people that come and work and play in our city. So for us, importantly, our strategy has been about delivering social and economic good, and very important to us in our locality up in the northeast of England, leaving no one and nowhere behind on our journey. When we did start, we put out a prior information notice, and thankfully we got about 60 responses from all sorts of operators, providers, MNOs, fibre operators, etc. And we held about 45 interviews over about a month. And what we found actually was that we weren't appearing on people's roadmaps. People didn't want to come into Sunderland, so that we knew as a city partnership we would have to intervene and stimulate investment in Sunderland and investment in this particular area. And that's exactly what we did. So we started our journey, and just onto the next slide there, Vicky, if we can please, just to tell you about a few of the things that we did. So very early in our journey, we delivered an ultra-fast free Wi-Fi service into key locations in the city, using what we called at the time a 5G ready communications rings. It used some of the early equipment in the early test beds and trials, and enabled us through millimetre wave to give some really fast speeds to some of our residents. And we went into a primary school in one of our most deprived areas of the city, where previously kids in that classroom couldn't upload YouTube clips, and of course created a whole world of opportunity for them. And we also went into a couple of our tower block community rooms in our social housing tower blocks, again providing a whole host of opportunity, as well as services across our seafront and into our city centre. And that was a tactical move, really. It was to get services out to people, leaving no one and nowhere behind, but also to really say to people, we were serious on this journey. We wanted to really make a difference, and people could then look at Sunderland perhaps in a little bit of a different light. One of the next things that we did was really focus on fibre. When we started our journey, we thought we were going to have to seek a partnership around fibre and wireless connectivity, but that initial engagement with the market told us that actually fibre pretty much could, if we played it carefully, take care of itself. So using an anchor tenancy model, which Dejan referred to a little bit there, and we were able to attract investment from City Fibre to invest in our city to the tune of about 62 million and bring gigabit fibre capability to over 95% of our premises. And we've also had significant traction then from Virgin Media and Netomnia, now investing in the city. And one thing I have learned on this journey, and I am not a technical person at all, but boy, you need a lot of fibre to build your wireless network. So again, that was really important for us in building those foundations in the city for continuing to attract that investment as we move forward. Again, about belief and conviction in our city, we then really turned our attention to delivering a range of end user transformational projects. So we've really led the way in terms of assistive technologies. We've now got a whole host of sensor networks supported by gateways and into an app that provides information for family members and carers and social care practitioners out to about 2,200 homes in Sunderland, and that's a big part of our strategy now. We developed a whole host of smart video sensor devices across some of our key aerial routes, measuring traffic and cycle and pedestrian flow, which has really helped with real-time interventions, but also longer-term urban planning. A range of smart building solutions and e-mobility solutions really supporting net zero. So again, that was about belief, it was about conviction, it was about us being able to say to potential investors, to government bodies, that we were here, we were serious, we were investing our own funds as well, and we were starting to have some real traction on this journey. In the summer of 2020, we bid into DCMS 5G Create funding, and we were awarded a collective bid with a consortia of 11 different organisations, a tune of 4.8 million, and that's to deliver 5G Create autonomous logistics, and ultimately automating a 40-ton truck between Bantech and Nissan, and using through the power of 5G, through the low latency, high bandwidth teleoperations to remove the safety driver. A great example of where public and private funds can come together and create something really spectacular, and that allowed us to put our first private 5G network in the city and delivering some really groundbreaking work there, which is really starting to achieve a phenomenal success for us in the city. Understanding as well that skills and education played a major role. We invested in a partnership with Digital Catapult to help us on the digital careers journey, and to work particularly with children and young people, with parents, with guardians in schools, etc., to really raise people's aspirations, young people's aspirations about a future career in tech, to create the workforce of the future, to to start that journey early. And likewise, in terms of enterprise, we knew that, you know, technology startups incredibly important again to our journey, and particularly again attracting inward investment into the city and making use of the networks that we were building. It's just like Dejan said, this is about shared infrastructure. So again, we secured that partnership, and that's been working for some time. And then just in terms of leaving no one and nowhere behind, very much working around digital inclusion as well. So we've got a number of schemes that are about devices for people, about affordable connectivity, but also about providing those all important basic digital literacy skills as well. We then bid in again in the summer of 2022, what was MHCLG then, before it changed its name to the Department of Levelling Up. So again, we were awarded £4.5 million of government funding, and that was to provide digital infrastructure, advanced wireless connectivity, 5G networks in our city centre and across a new urban quarter that we've been developing called Riverside, and also a city-wide LoRaWAN, an Internet of Things backbone. And what we used that money to do, as well as deliver the networks, was to kickstart what we called a 5G neutral host procurement, which was the next pivotal step really on our journey. So just on the next slide, Vicky, and again, hopefully resonating with what Dejan said there, we decided to put an offer in, which was really, this is what the council can bring to this partnership, but also this is exactly what we're asking from a private sector partner as well in terms of the future delivery of the smart city agenda in Sunderland. So we went out in November 2020 via a competitive dialogue procurement exercise. We were seeking that private sector partner to come in to co-invest with us and form a joint venture, a very long-term arrangement, 20 years, so that we could put in shared funds, we could share the risk, we could share the rewards over a long-term period, because this stuff isn't built overnight, as I've learned as well on the journey. So absolutely, the council would invest initial funds, some of its own funds, but also those funds contributed by MHCLG as it was then. It would contribute existing assets in the city, and this is in terms of things like our free ultra-fast Wi-Fi network, the 5G network up at Nissan, so we could actually put those assets into the joint venture, as well as providing that right of way across a whole range of council infrastructure and assets, our lamp columns, our buildings, etc., etc. We said we would buy back services from the joint venture, so immediately creating that demand for a private sector partner coming in, supporting future bids and investment funding, and we were able to show a successful track record to bring people along with us on our journey, ensure through barrier busting initiatives that we could support ease of deployment, and really promote 5G across the city and advanced networks, but with our partners as well to build that demand. So again, wanting to build shared infrastructure for shared use. And what we asked of the private sector partner was to bring forward the expertise and the capacity to design, build and operate these next generation wireless networks, something the council just couldn't do on its own. We wanted somebody to come and invest in our city with us, recruit customers to use that infrastructure and really stimulate that demand. And importantly, not just about networks, but about supporting innovation use case development. So after a 10-month competitive dialogue procurement process, quite an intense process where we started out with 7 private sector partners, we whittled that down to 1 and we awarded contract. And just on the next slide, Vicky, to a company called BAI Communications. Back in October, we went live in 2021. So BAI aren't a household name, but they operate across the globe. They run next generation networks in Toronto, New York, Hong Kong, Australia. They won the TfL deal in London in March of last year, and I keep needing to update this map. We need another pin and Sunderland on there. I'm really proud to have attracted BAI into the city. So global leaders bring superb credentials in terms of the networks they build, but bring a lot to the city as well in terms of that wider partnership deal. So just on the next slide there, Vicky, if I may please. So we believe this is a first of its kind, smart city and 5G neutral host joint venture. A 20-year partnership, as I've said, we're in it for the long haul, but we believe this was absolutely needed, this public-private sector partnership, to achieve our smart city vision and the resulting, really significant benefits that can bring. It is about building a network of networks, so 5G, LoRaWAN, Wi-Fi, free ultra-fast Wi-Fi for our residents, right across the city. So really important for us. It's not just all about one network, it's about horses for courses and having that range of connectivity for the different use cases that we want to deliver. but then really getting involved in the city and in delivering those transformational use cases that just make that significant difference for businesses and residents. And we're well on our way in our first 5 months of partnership now to delivering a whole range of those. BAI are backed by the Canadian Pension Plan, and so can invest significant financial resources in Sunderland, but it's not just about the finances, it's about their global expertise and the organisational resources they can bring as well. They've opened a local office, they're building a local team, and we have a Sunderland GM now working within the city. So bringing real expertise for us here in the Northeast, and really becoming the aggregator of a really strong supplier ecosystem to support the joint venture, working with a whole number of supply chain partners such as Mavinier, WHP, etc., but also supporting local businesses as well, the local supply chain that we've been working with over the last few years. But ultimately, we're there to work in partnership. We want to develop Sunderland as that leading UK smart city and centre of excellence. And just on the next slide, Vicky, we really believe this is an all-encompassing smart city. So yes, we need all of that underpinning infrastructure showing there on the blue lines, you know, that range of connectivity to suit a whole host of use cases. But already we're working across a significant number of verticals there that are just covering every aspect, because for us, you know, we want people that come to live, to work, to play in Sunderland to really feel like they're part of a connected city and to benefit from all of the digital and data enhancements and solutions that can make such a big difference to people's lives. And as I said earlier, you know, really not taking anything away from the traction that we need to continue, which is around that education, skills, the enterprise and the inclusion initiatives as well, which is a big part of the partnership. And again, you know, marrying the public investment with private sector investment, we can go so much further, so much farther, and get that, you know, get that acceleration in terms of the pace and the scale of delivery. So just on the next slide, please, if I can, Vicky. So what are the kind of key lessons for us, I guess, and what would, you know, we share with others? And we've got a lot to learn as well. And so all ears when these sessions are held. For us, what's made a real difference, I have to say, is digital leadership. We've had some great leadership in the city, from our own chief executive, Patrick Melia, who really understands the beneficial impact of digital across the cityscape, but also the digital leadership from a number of our partners across the city, whether it's the university, whether it's the hospitals, whether it's the college, whether it's private industry such as Nissan, etc. And I think that's made a real big difference and made us attractive as well to big global organisations such as BAI. I think developing that citywide approach when we started, which has really stood us in good stead, and having that clear vision and strategy that resonated with Sunderland, was relevant to us, to our locality, to our challenges, and that really has helped us along the way and has made us stay true to what we're trying to achieve. I think starting the journey as well, we were coming unstuck with some of our use cases because we didn't have that underpinning connectivity, but that's certainly gained traction and confidence. And when we did present ourselves to the marketplace, we had a credible story to tell, and we were able to bring investment in because of that. I think using those public assets to attract that private sector investment, whether that's been the council's wide area network procurement that attracted fibre, whether that's been street assets, etc., or whether indeed that's been a number of use cases, but using all of that to attract that private sector investment and bundling that into a way that makes it easy for the private sector to come and work with us in Sunderland. I think really having that clear narrative about the value proposition, particularly when we went out for the 5G neutral host joint venture. Procurement, being really clear about what the council and its partners in the city could bring, but then being really clear about what we were asking from a public sector partner as well, I think was incredibly important to have that clarity. And I guess the biggest lesson, always keeping that open mind, boy. On this journey, we've had so many bumps in the road. We've had to change tacks on a number of occasions for the right reasons, but just really keeping flexible, keeping that open mind, staying true, of course, to your vision, to your strategy, but certainly in terms of your execution, just being really flexible about that. I think that's really all I was going to say. Hopefully I am bang on time there. I certainly haven't had anybody waving at me, so that's always a good sign. And thank you, Vicky. I'll hand back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Liz. Really always fascinating to hear about the work that you're doing in Sunderland, and as you say, really kind of leading the march, I think, on the UK around that work. I've scribbled down a whole host of questions from my side that I'm going to be asking you when we get to the panel session. I just wanted to remind our audience that I think there was tons of really great information in there. If there are particular questions or thoughts or things you just want to explore more with Liz, don't forget to put them in the chat. We'll be putting them to Liz and all of our speakers at the end of the presentations. And next up, we've got a second case study from Sarah from Infralink Programme, talking about things from a more programmatic level, about the work that she is leading in Scotland. Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Vicky. And I just want to pause for a moment and say on International Women's Day today, it's great to see such a high proportion of women on this panel, and I think UK 5G has always been a really good supporter of that, so I just wanted to call that out. Really good work there. And yeah, thank you very much. I suppose I kind of sit in the middle here. We've had Dejan with the level, the theory, the high level, what we're trying to achieve, Liz with the really kind of on the ground, what's actually happening. I'm kind of sitting in the middle piece as to where we can help get started on some of that and some tools to help you take things forward. So Infralink is a national initiative. If you can move on to the next slide, please. That's trying to focus on the way in which the public sector and the mobile industry can engage better to improve mobile deployment across Scotland. We want to bring together those that value connectivity with the operators that deliver it. Infralink aims to make the public sector's engagement with mobile operators less fraught, more efficient, and ultimately more productive, using healthy engagement to build long-lasting relationships and promote investment and growth on the back of excellent nationwide connectivity. Infralink is funded by the Scottish Government through the Scotland 5G Centre and is delivered by Scottish Futures Trust, who I'm a member of. And we're a public sector body of infrastructure experts, again funded by Scottish Government. And we're here to support the public sector in delivering infrastructure projects ranging across a number of sectors, whether that's hospitals, schools, net zero, and of course, digital connectivity. The Infralink goal is using in-house industry expertise and public sector expertise, coupling that with best practice and a lot of engagement with stakeholders. And what we want to do is bring an operational deployment picture and provide credible approach that works for Scotland as a whole. We're not mediators or agents or consultants. We're here as essentially a free resource to improve the transactional process and make Scotland's local authorities an attractive partner to work with. Hence, I suppose, why Vicky invited me here today for the investment session. If you can move on to the next slide. So we started the programme by engaging with stakeholders in the public sector and in mobile industry about the current motivations and challenges when delivering on their connectivity objectives. One of the phrases that we heard quite early on was about it was a national network delivered at a local level. And I think that's a really good phrase that captures the challenges and the opportunity in mobile telecoms. Mobile network operators, they plan at a national level and need all of their sites to be delivering a quality service to users and to be getting return on their investment so that they can support future deployment, going back to Dejan's kind of return of investment point. Whether that network is rolled out on time and within cost is determined, however, at a local level, and local authorities have a big role to play in this. They set the strategies and policies for departments and organisations to aim for and comply with. So whether that's in economic development, in housing or asset management, in planning, while central government might set the actual framework, it's the local authorities that are the gatekeepers to facilitating the connectivity in the area. The local authorities are the asset owners, whether that's land, buildings, street furniture, in a variety of locations that could be reused to house digital infrastructure and serve the needs of the community. And going right through to the end of the value chain, as Liz mentioned, they are also, or can be, the end users. So using connectivity to deliver public services to the residents. Despite having this really critical role to play in the rollout of mobile infrastructure in Scotland, and I would say the UK, digital connectivity is often not a function that's recognised in most local authorities, and is, I suppose, consequently not allocated dedicated resource to promote and engage on it. As a result, MNOs don't know who to contact to discuss potential deployments or problems that they're facing in the area, and there's no internal advocate to join the dots in the organisation. Commitment to supporting connectivity needs to come from top down, as Liz mentioned, about strategies that can filter across departments. And I'll give an example where I suppose even those local authorities that we've engaged with that have digital strategies, some of them have like operational policies that are dating back to the years of 3G 20 years ago that actually restrict infrastructure on their assets. And that's, I'll come on to some of the things that we've learned, but that's one of the things that we've seen is that discord between strategy and operational activity, and having that link between who's looking out for that, who is trying to push that, and making sure that there's that, pardon the pun, connection across the whole of the organisation to ensure it's supporting that wider goal of the local authorities. I think also we've seen that there's been a lot of knowledge that's built up within local authorities on the fibre side over the last 10 years, particularly in the likes of the super fast broadband programmes that have rolled out, I mean, touched the whole of the UK really. But mobile is still seen as the poor relation. And I'm not advocating that local authorities become telecoms experts and specialists. There is benefit in having agents involved in this and advisors, but I think particular departments need to have a good base knowledge, whether to engage with telecoms operators, but also to be instructing as well in the right way. And this is really, I think one of the other things is local authorities and MNOs are ultimately serving the same end users. I think once we started to do a lot of engagement and that kind of penny dropped, both parties are serving the residents and businesses in that area. And going back to one of the points about giving them a quality of service and trying to work towards that same goal, I think kind of can bring parties together. If there is that more understanding of each other and understanding of the mobile telecoms, it'll allow the local authorities to be more aware of the relevant touch points for connectivity in their organisation. So whether that's planning, asset management, streets, lighting, roads, etc. And it'll allow connectivity to be part of the decision-making process rather than an afterthought. I think we've seen that really quite well with things like net zero. If you look back to 10 years ago, net zero was one of these things that we were, oh yeah, we're building a school, what about this? It's now ingrained in every kind of business case, everything that we're looking at. Digital inclusion needs to be a part of that, and digital infrastructure that is going to solve that digital inclusion problem needs to be part of that as well. It's not just a case of it will happen, it's how we're going to deliver it. I think, again, Liz has just called out some really key points in how you can do that. So what is happening as a result of these challenges? Well, 4G rollout, whether that's increasing the current capacity in the network or extending it to more rural areas, is being impacted. The public sector's assets are not on the list of potential sites when industry are looking for new or alternative sites. And this is due to perception or experiences that the process with local authorities is just too hard. And so they're looking for make-do sites, and agreements are being put in place that really, they may meet the immediate need, but they may not support the longer term needs of the businesses or the communities. And 5G will need even more local authority and public sector engagement. Local authorities own the infrastructure required for small cell densification, whether that's CCTV systems, street furniture, transport assets. And with more assets will mean more agreements, more engagement. And this is potential to be a real, I think, drain on resource and result in potentially lack of joint of decisions, and sad to see it, potentially increased risks of litigation as well. But I think there is a way that we can support faster negotiations to handle larger volumes, while still allowing for site-specific requirements. Going back to one of Dejan's points early on, how do you look at this? Whether you look at a site, an asset, you need to take account of individual requirements and concerns of that organisation and that area. So this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. You can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So Infralink is building, and next one again, please. Thank you. Infralink is building on the work from across the UK. So the likes of Glasgow City Council, who established their telecoms unit, West Midlands 5G, Greater London Authority. We'll be picking up the phone a little bit more to Dublin, who of course announced their unit as well, very similar to the Glasgow City Council unit. But it's about taking what's been working for them and scaling up the approach. Infralink's tools are for land, buildings and street assets, and they take account of different requirements between rural areas and urban areas. Again, going back to this national scalable element of Infralink. We're using these tools and presenting a proactive and balanced starting point for discussions to improve the current way of working by making the process more efficient, deployment quicker and cheaper, and ultimately those areas that use Infralink tools being made more attractive for industry to work with. I just want to make one thing clear, they're not here to be, I suppose, the end result, but they're a way to get there quicker, which does an impact on the business case when looking to compare against one area as opposed to the other. How willing are they to engage? How ready are they to do so? If you can move on to the next slide. And the next one, thank you. So how are we doing? Well, in March 2021, we published the first version of our standard documents and payment guidance for macro sites on land and buildings. So that's the 4G, 5G macro sites. And these are on our website for you to download, so anybody can access them. They were created using existing agreed templates, actually based upon one that had been mediated by amongst the Greater London Authority, and also methodologies that benefit from, again, being used, insights from stakeholder engagement, and also support by case law outcomes as well. So again, sit within the legislative framework that's been established by the Electronic Communications Code. And we've published these for a variety of sites in urban and rural locations. Again, they're a balanced starting point for negotiations and not the end, and so can be bespoke and adjusted to fit the need. What we wanted to do here was avoid the need for one side to put on a lease or a style on the table and then spend time trying to get to that point where you're really getting down to the nub of the problem. Let's shortcut that and start with something that we can both work with. As I say, that was back in March 2021, and we'll be issuing a second version of these leases and the payment guidance at the end of March 2022, again on our website. But we're also going to be issuing standard agreements for IoT and small cell sites. Again, both of those based upon best practice that has been used and agreed by a number of parties. We are hoping, we've actually heard recently that a number of our tools, the macro standard leases and payment guidance, have been being used by public and private sector landlords, which is really encouraging, which means they're not just being used, but they're being accepted. And I think that's a really good start to show that change in attitude and change in approach. One party has to be the leader in this. We've chosen to focus on local authorities as landowners with that kind of mass ownership of assets and trying to push that forward and being a kind of putting their T's and C's on the table early on. If you can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So we've started to engage with the local authorities on this, essentially working with regions. Now, going back again, Dejan, I think you read my mind in some of this already. Maybe we've been working together too long. We looked at this from a local authority perspective, initially looking at Glasgow City Council as one of the leaders in this space and what they were doing for a local authority. But when you tried to look at this across Scotland, you had to look at it depending on where a local authority started from, what their geography was like, level of interest from MNOs. And so, but we also recognise that there's already a coming together of local authorities in a region. I mean, we've seen this with West Midlands and some wider partnerships. So what we looked at here was existing groupings that were already happening in Scotland. A lot of this, well, Tay cities came under the city and regional deals. The UK government funded those deals that have brought already together partners with similar outlooks, whether that's across investment in infrastructure, digital, health, tourism, etc. And utilising that existing bond and existing way of working to work together. And we started working with Tay cities just back in August. to actually put some of our, I suppose, what we created into practice. Now, the aim of this is really to start to create a blueprint for how you improve engagement across a group of local authorities. While we've started with Tay-Cities, we've also recently started to engage with Greater Glasgow. And that is about putting in place a SPOC, so a single point of contact, as I say, somebody that the industry can go to, somebody that in the organisation is pushing and driving forward that digital agenda. We're engaging with them to explain about the tools, so to understand the background, again, going back to that knowledge, why the tools, the leases, the payment guidance, the way that they are, talk about the legislative background, talk about and do some knowledge sessions about the mobile sector itself and how it is changing and how it's developing. Then we've also looked to pull together, we've facilitated engagements between industry and local authorities. Again, sometimes this can be the biggest challenge can be, who do I speak to? And it's similarly as hard on the industry side. I say harder sometimes on the industry side to know to speak to than on the council side. And that's because, of course, industry have various levels of suppliers, infrastructure providers, agents that they've got as well. So this is about bringing together the parties. The other thing we've tried to do in this space is also to talk about their needs, and going back to Liz's point about, well, what existing programs do they have going? What's their hotspots? Where are they trying to get more engagement? And really that understanding about connectivity on their own patch. Some of this information you can get through Ofcom, obviously through their Connected Nations report, but also trying to get, I suppose, a current view as to what that is. And there's a number of providers out there that can give those local views in terms of actual connectivity, but again, knowing the problem areas so they can have meaningful conversations. If you move on to the next one, please. And what this early work has led to is us being in a great position to then move on to submit a bid for the DCIA programme that DCMS put out last year. Just to get a bit of build up to this, I mean, we started doing a discovery exercise back in start of 2020, really, in terms of looking at what was needed to be provided to industry. So in terms of the assets, what information was there held by local authorities, what kind of state was it in, what kind of position, what kind of data aggregators were there in the place. And so we did a lot of really base level information during 2020 and into 2021. And that was really to look at what could be created and maintained in terms of putting in place a national solution. And one of the key things that we learned through that was about trying to reuse data, reuse things that all would be being produced by local authorities so that you weren't adding to that burden, but also it could be kept up to date really easily and be something that's credible. The other element was data aggregators. We have the benefit Scotland of a data aggregator funded by the local authorities called the Improvement Service. And that's about, I think there's a real opportunity to link to Scottish Government policy here about opening up data and utilising it for wider purposes. So those are some of the two key elements early on that helps us then develop a minimal viable product of the connectivity marketplace. And this really kind of showed the kind of shop window really for a local authority about what was there, what was assets. And when we did this within stakeholders, it was amazing that we didn't know that there was a local authority assets in there if we'd known. And it was amazing that reaction that we got when we started to show this. You'll also see on here we had a layer of coverage data as well that we simulated. And again, that just helped to add to the conversation in terms of what the need was. I think when we discussed the need, it really helped with the understanding as to why industry were looking to put a mast in there. Again, it started to join those dots. And as I say, this really put us in a great position to then put in for a bid with Tay-Cities being our project partner. and then we're successful with that bid, just announced in January there. Really pleased with that, to be working not only with Tay cities, which covers Perth, Dundee, Angus and Fife, but also with our service providers, so Citena's platform provider, Connected Places Catapult, who we've been working with throughout our discovery process improvement service that I mentioned, and some other really strong local authority links like the Local Government Digital Office and Scotland 5G Centre, again trying to utilise that network that already existing to be furthering the message and furthering the understanding. But we're going to be building not only the platform that's supporting 4G and 5G macro and small cell rollout, but we'll also be focusing on this data process, the identification, standardisation, the evaluation, and this new word that we've recently learned, ingestion as well. It's a good word, but the pulling in of the data, and how do you create that but maintain it as well? So again, going back to the sustainable element. So it's something that's credible and reliable, and something that can be used going forward. If we can just go to the next slide. So, I mean, that's the end of mine, but I think if some of my takeaways from mine would be, I think local authorities and public sector bodies play a critical role in 4G and 5G deployment, and I think really can change the current direction of travel. That's totally what we'd like to see in Scotland, where we take a more collaborative approach, joined up approach, and we can change the assumption that public sector is too hard to work with. I think, you know, Liz and Sunderland are a great example of what can be done, but there can be some small steps that actually start to indicate that to industry and show that willingness to pursue opportunities and overcome challenges. I think the local authorities are stretched and they can't do this alone, and there needs to be some starting points to build off, and Infralink's here to essentially provide a framework of activity to allow the organisations to do that. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Sarah. We are going to move into our panel session now, but before we jump into that, Sarah, I suppose one immediate question I've got for you before we cover off some of the questions that we've had coming in. The work that you talked about there is obviously is based in Scotland. To what extent is that work applicable across the other nations as well?
It is. I would say we actually have taken some of it from our English stakeholders that we've worked with as well. So again, Greater London Authority, DCMS, and from West Midlands. What I'd like to see is it's the approach. So that's some of the key elements. So if I go through the leases and the payment guidance are compliant with ECC, so Electronic Communications Code, UK-wide applicable legislation, case law, again, UK-wide. There's just obviously some of the legal people like to call it kilting in there, so that easily can be dekilted. But again, I think it's about the approach. It's having standardized elements, having a balanced starting point, and the desire to engage, to having had the discussions internally. That's the key piece, and I'd say that's the challenge. Is we can set out standardized documents as much as you want, but if you don't have those discussions internally to get the buy-in at a strategic and operational level to say, yes, we want to go down that route. And for some organisations, it will be a change, and it'll be a change for some agents as well, who have maybe been under agreeing deals under certain circumstances and a certain methodology. But that's where, again, it comes down to those key individuals, those key leaders in the organisation, to be having those conversations, pointing out the likes of Infralink and other standardised documents and pushing that right. What is our approach? Let's make a decision on this, because if we've got these digital strategies and digital ambitions, we need to make sure that the operational process internally aligns with that.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. And yeah, obviously that kind of mirrors a lot of what Liz was saying as well, around kind of that real importance of that digital leadership piece. A couple of specific questions that we've had coming through. First one, Liz, I'm going to direct to you. So, considering 5G neutral host networks, interested to see Sunderland's progress. Are the MNOs joining this platform?
So certainly the approach that we're taking in Sunderland is to build 5G neutral host networks. Initially, we're launching our first networks in just a few months' time now. June, July, we'll have our first large private 5G network across our city centre. We are, it is our ambition and certainly our intention that we'll work hand in hand with MNOs along our journey. I think they've a key role to play. So yes, that's certainly our direction of travel, but it's early days for us, and yeah, we're engaging with a number of different players in the market.
Brilliant, thank you, Liz. And this is one I'll put to the group as a whole. So interesting to see this working well in urban footprints. Given the huge benefits that connectivity can bring to rural settings, are there any examples of progress and use cases in less urban settings?
I'm happy to pick up on some of that one.
Yeah.
We've been working with DMSL, who are rolling out the part of the shared rural network. Scotland has a really big opportunity to benefit from that. And again, we've been engaging with them to talk about, I suppose, standard leases as well and the payment guidance, but also to look particularly about who to speak to in the local authorities, facilitating, again, coming together so that there's an understanding even before you get into the planning and the talk about sites of what is trying to be achieved. And also starting to consider, again, assets in where, so we can put the assets into that consideration pot. Again, they've got their own requirements and they've got where they have to go to meet the requirements from DCMS, but again, it's putting it out there and putting that and facilitating the discussion. So I think that's one of the biggest opportunities for rural communities is the shared rail network and maximising that public sector investment that's being put in, as well as that private sector.
Thank you. Dejan, did you want to come in there as well?
Yeah, just absolutely echoing to echo what Sarah says there, and just sort of some very kind of specific. I think, this concept of shared infrastructure, basically it applies to urban environments as much as does the rural environments. I mean, fundamentally, there is an issue around business case and the return on investment, whether you look at that from the M&O perspective, from a place perspective, for a third-party investor perspective. It's like, okay, can we make this pay for itself in the long run? It's the kind of different reasons why different geography present a challenge, but the answer is potentially shared infrastructure. And just to give you an evidence of that universal applicability, and I will put my digital DCIA project hat on at this point. We have 8 projects all across the UK. They're all regional, at regional scale, and we have absolute full range of geographies represented across those 8. We have really, really rural places. We have coastal areas. We have super dense urban environments, suburban environments, shires. We have it all, and it's just what came through in the application. It was like a very clearly evidenced throughout all of the applications and all the pilots that will go forward.
Thank you. I think just a couple of things I would add on to that as well. I think, Sarah, the piece you were presenting around kind of the Tay Cities region and actually some of those city deals forming kind of groupings of places. And I think, that same approach can apply in rural settings as well. We've seen places such as Essex and Hertfordshire, for example, have formed the Digital Innovation Zone, which is looking at some of those more kind of rural parts of those counties for exactly that reason of that together they can form a more attractive proposition for inward investment. The second thing I would say is that 5G New Thinking, which is one of the 5G testbed and trials programs, they are specifically looking at the topic of rural connectivity. And the key output of that project is the creation of a toolkit, which is specifically designed for rural communities to help you do exactly this. So to look at how you make yourself more attractive, but also to look at potentially how you kind of seize control and manage and deploy your own networks and look at how you can take control of connectivity yourself. So that will be launched in a couple of weeks, and you'll be able to find that on the place section of the UK 5G site, which we mentioned at the beginning of the call. So just to cover that point.
I would also add to that, Vicky, that the regional element to this is by coupling a mix of urban and rural, you're creating a wider conversation, because connectivity doesn't stop at a local authority border. And that actually is one of the difficulties, is if you can't get, a mast is on the edge, but it's going to serve a kind of urban population, but it might also serve a rural population. What you're doing is, by doing it on a regional basis and mixing up those areas, you're having that natural kind of bleed into the other areas, and you're pushing that conversation and not creating the barriers by saying, oh, well, we only stop there. Actually, well, no, let's work with others. And the other thing we're finding is about the synergies as well across the regions, that the local authorities are starting to talk about similar ways to approach street lighting, and you get some synergies that actually might benefit the whole of the area. Again, industry coming to it as an area rather than in a region, rather than just particular local authorities. It's a different way for them to look at it in terms of the business case, because there actually could be more benefits and more return and savings if they look at it as a region rather than just particular dots on a map.
Yeah, Liz, well, I think you were going to add something into that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to add, I know there's some great examples up and down the UK in terms of things like agriculture and tourism, particularly around rural areas. You know, people like Rural Dorset are doing some great work. You know, we're in a DCI bid with a consortia around north of Tyne that covers the whole of Northumberland. Again, a massive rural area. And I think many of the challenges for us in an urban area are exactly the same, you know, all facing challenges around, you know, things like the health and social care agenda, you know, public service delivery, you know, even, you know, the more effective collection of waste and management of highways, etc., which again can just be greater challenges for people in rural areas. So I think many shared synergies, just a different geography, really.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So I'm going to take things right back to basics and back to the start. So, you know, we're ultimately talking about securing investment today. It's fair to say that is a huge and critical milestone, but actually can feel like a fairly daunting and overwhelming task. What do each of you, I'm going to come to each of you in turn, believe should be the very first step in that process? And Liz, I'm going to come to you first, please.
Oh, there we go. No time to think. I mean, I think for me, it's probably just going to echo really what I said in the presentation. And I think just having that very clear purpose defined. You know, I think if you approach a marketplace, if you try and seek investment with a confused picture, you know, if anything, you'll probably scare an investment market. So I think just having that very clear purpose, a very clear strategy, and understanding exactly what it is you can bring and get your house in order, actually. And lots of help today in terms of how to do that is going to stand you in good stead and you know, bring a higher degree of success.
Brilliant. Thank you. One of the things that you mentioned in your presentation, which I thought was really interesting, is you talked about how you'd started, you were running sort of initiatives, you were doing things yourself before you went out to the market. Do you think that that was an important step for you to have taken, rather than going, right, we're going to do, we need to do digital connectivity and then going straight out to the market?
I think so, because I think, you know, we were giving the marketplace the belief in us. We were you know, we were serious about this. We were already investing our own funds in this. You know, we were already putting our own efforts and resources into this agenda. We were already creating that stimulus for demand for any shared network. So I think it was just a much greater belief and conviction. And I think being able to speak with a citywide voice as well, certainly when we were in competitive dialogue and we were trying to seek a neutral host partner, and many thought we were bonkers actually when we first started that journey. Many thought it would fail. I think being able to have a number of sessions in competitive dialogue where the university, the hospital, the college, actually Nissan, you know, other people joined us, I think presented that citywide approach. So absolutely, I think like I say, I just think it's about that confidence in the journey, and you've got to give that marketplace confidence and belief that you know, you're a place that they should invest in.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Great advice there, Liz. Dejan, coming to you with the same question, please. Demand.
It's all about, you start with the demand. That's my kind of personal view on this, because as any other investment case, that's everything else falls out of that. And I think one big issue for the MNOs and the rest of the telecoms industry historically in this space is they're not sure where the demand is. And I think that's that coordinating role and of a kind of, whether it's economic zone or whether it's a region or whatever form this entity takes, is identify those drivers of demand, mobilize them together, build it, as Liz said, build it kind of a clear view, a confident view that demand is there. Also, there's an always at the back of this is a conversation, how do we connect places that are currently unconnected? again, what can we do to actually kind of feed that demand through the areas? You know, again, goes back to this idea, where do you physically locate your economic development zones, innovation zones, etc., etc. So I'd say if I have to pick one list, it's demand.
Brilliant, thank you. And Sarah, last but not least.
I'm just glad nobody pinched mine, but I personally, you've got to have it in somebody's job description. I think unless somebody has it, again, going back to the stretched element, it's got to be part of their day-to-day working, and that's difficult given the other things and the knowledge element, etc. But you've got to have what we've seen in our work with T-Cities and Greater Glasgow is that you've got to have somebody in there who's going to drive that discussion about the strategy, find out the demand, etc. Now, in different, I mean, obviously there was a really big push from the top within Sunderland, and I know Patrick was really keen on that, and that came from there. But there's the functional element of that internally as well, and I think that's the thing, people see it as an extra, but actually you've got to make it not an extra. And be it part where somebody's accountable and somebody's responsible for driving that, and that can facilitate all the other elements.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice and insights from all of you there. Thank you. We've talked on this a little bit, and we've heard we've talked about demand. Liz, when in your presentation you really kind of, I think, had that slide that showed sort of stackable all of the different use cases, looking at this from all of the elements and adding those things together. We've talked about being confident and having that conviction when you go out to the market, but are there any other elements that you think are real key components that investors are looking for, especially, I suppose, potentially in those areas that are not the obvious targets that the MNOs and the likes are already going gun-ho into deployment in? What are the sort of the key things that you think investors are looking for? And Sarah, maybe we'll reverse that. Sarah, maybe I'll come to you first.
I think, again, it's the willingness to engage. I mean, this might not be quite exactly on your point, but one of the insights, again, when we were engaging, that we found was MNOs are looking at the UK. They're split up into regional areas, but they have a target, what they're wanting to achieve. They have a budget, what they want to spend. They're looking at how can we achieve that return on investment for this investment, and they dish that out to agents, to contractors, and they give them very small windows actually to do this. So, for instance, they might say, right, we want to look at this area. Here's 2 weeks to actually find some sites. And then we're going to narrow that down to 6. Then they give you another 2 weeks, and they try and finalize that to maybe 1 or 2 to take forward. What I'm trying to say is, if you're putting forward, like Liz said, about credibility, willingness, engagement, terms, that you've got the in-house sorted, that's I think a really big game changer, because it changes the interest levels, and it also, I think, allows them to do the sums, essentially, to look at, well, how much is this going to take? I think, though, obviously it comes back to credibility as well. And the other thing is the alignment, again, of processes. So I'll go back to my asset management example of some local authorities don't have things aligned when they can't put actually any kit on assets. So I think, and that might be more focused, to be honest, in the answer to more existing commercial rollout areas rather than non-commercial rollout areas. But I think it's really important to be aware of the understanding of the way MNOs are looking at it, in terms of,
yes,
and we've seen that, for instance, I know Glasgow, we've learned a lot from in there, in terms of they've been competing against the likes of Sunderland, Birmingham, Manchester, etc., and trying to see essentially how they can make themselves high up in that list and an area of interest and note.
Yeah, so I think, coming back to what you were saying, Diane, about demand, and I suppose in some ways that potential is your answer to this question is actually potentially the same, right? Which is that they need to see that there's a commercial opportunity there. But it sounds like, across the group, what we're saying is there's almost two tracks that you need to consider. One is you need to prove to a private sector entity that they can make money out of that, because that's ultimately what they exist to do. But the second is you also need to prove that you're going to be easy to work with, and that groundwork is really important as well, to make sure that is an effective relationship for both sides.
I feel there's a Dragon's Den moment here. I remember many years back, an investor told me, well, never mind all my big spreadsheets, which I hire rocket scientists to do. At the end of the day, it's about two things. Do I believe a proposition in, and do I believe this person can deliver on it? Mm-hmm. And I think that we are very much reflecting on that right now. In addition to that, I'd like to just touch on something. And I think there was a bit of a hint in the previous questions around this, and that's the role of the MNOs in all of this. Yes. And I just want to really emphasize, this is not a zero-sum game. This is not about displacement out of the market. This is actually a hugely growing market. And it's genuinely economically, and in every other sense, this is the win-win situation. And one thing, Sarah, you brought up earlier is fundamentally, there's all too often there's this kind of
Mm-hmm.
perception of it's the industry versus local authorities. And I think we need to move away from that, because having spoken to all of both groups of stakeholders, it's very clear to me that everybody wants the same thing. Mm. Everybody wants to connect more people, more businesses, more things, and do it better. So where we tend to trip over collectively is about that stuff about mutual understanding and language, and just kind of making sure we actually come together rather than fall apart. It's not a zero-sum game. This is a growing market, and I think investors will respond to that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Thank you. I'm just kind of building on that. So one of the things that we heard in the session that we had last week, we were talking about best practice for kind of local authorities. And one of the things that we talked about quite clearly was that, this isn't just the responsibility of kind of public sector, that actually, as you say, it's two sides, two parties come together. How can we work well? So I suppose one of the other things here is it's not just how do places sort of pitch themselves as an investment opportunity, but how do you actually review and assess whether a potential investor is right for your place and for what you're trying to do. And Liz, I'm going to bring you in here on the basis that you have obviously gone through that process from your side, and whether you've got any particular advice on when you're a bit further down the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it comes back to that clarity. And, we were very clear when we set out on our procurement process what we needed from a private sector partner. And I think that morphed and changed a little bit as we went through competitive dialogue procurement. And that's exactly what competitive dialogue is there for. But ultimately, we stayed true to that. And I think, some of the organisations that fell by the wayside for one reason or another throughout that journey was actually because we weren't the right fit for them and they weren't the right fit for us. And I think, entering into a 20-year strategic partnership, you've got to be comfortable with who you're working with.
Absolutely.
And I think, it is about shared kind of values and a shared vision and a shared ambition. And just coming back to that question you posed before, we often say, the networks, that it's just the underlying infrastructure, it's just a means to an end, and we're not, we're almost not too interested in that. It's about the outcomes that we can achieve by having that shared infrastructure. It's about the absolutely transformational use cases that we can develop. It's about the difference that we can make to people's lives. And actually, if I put myself in the shoes of BAI, who did choose Sunderland, who did invest in Sunderland, and I asked that question to them, I'd absolutely guarantee they'd tell you it was the ambition of the city, and therefore the opportunity, and not about the networks. They'll be built, we'll look after them, we'll feed and water them, but it's about the significant opportunities, the digital and data solutions that we can derive from them, and how we can create a true smart city that, let's face it, is exportable, really anywhere. We all face the same challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And Richard in the chat has just sort of seconded that by saying that, it's really that alignment and that plan that is what made Sunderland attractive. So yeah, really, I think some great advice there. Thank you. So one final question I'll bring to all of you is just a final thought of the day that you want to leave our audience with. Dan, I'm going to come to you first this time. Being very fair.
Quite well. I personally, I thought this was a brilliant session today. I really do, because what made it really stand out for me, and I come this with scars on my back from doing smart cities for a long time and doing telecoms for a long time. We have been doing a lot of strategizing for quite a long time. And what absolutely excites me at the moment is to see this is now becoming a practice. And all the credit to Liz, all the credit to Sarah, all the credit to all the other places around the UK who are actually pushing the boundaries on this, because that's exactly what we need. We are moving away from plans and ideas and strategies into actually practical implementation, practical delivery, and that means we're going to get to the outcomes sooner rather than later.
Brilliant, thank you, Dan. Liz?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's, don't be too overwhelmed. I remember sitting in a dark room with a few of my friends in early 2019 thinking, what the heck, how on earth are we gonna even start to tackle this? And I don't know if Dejan remembers, but we had a conversation way back in the early days, and he was giving me some advice. And it's, how to eat the elephant. It's kind of bite-sized chunks. So don't be overwhelmed, take it one step at a time. And, once you start on the journey, then, again, having that clarity of purpose, really helpful. But once you start, then naturally you'll pick up steam and you'll start to run with it. But I think just really focus on those outcomes and just remember, yes, we can feel overwhelmed with the connectivity issue, but it is just that means to an end. And if we're not focusing on the outcomes, then what are we actually doing it for?
Brilliant, thank you. Eating the elephant one bite at a time, best advice ever. And Sarah, tough order to try and beat that advice.
It is. I don't know if I can come up with something like that, but I think there's an opportunity here to change the way that things are working. The Electronic Communication Code came in 2019, and it hasn't been the panacea that was envisaged to hit the connectivity targets. Last year, there was a consultation to review that, not on the non-financial elements, and that'll go so far. But industry is frustrated, banging their head, trying to look for another options. And I think it's about providing that olive branch a little bit and saying, look, engagement essentially in my eyes is the alternative, is the different way of doing things, and I think the more productive way of doing things. So I think the opportunity is there. The engagement is, MNOs are wanting to engage, and because they've got their own company targets, but also the government targets as well in terms of 5G coverage for the UK. So I think, again, the opportunity is there, going back to Liz's point, step by step, and making those relationships, the engagement, and starting to build trust and relationship there, I think is the key. But as I say, I think both parties are looking for a different way, because the current format of long negotiations, even litigation tribunals and things like that is not the way, whether they're a public or private sector. So take that first step.
Brilliant, thank you all. Thank you to all of our speakers and panelists today. Really kind of great discussion. Thank you to our audience for posing those questions. Always great to see those coming through. So we are at the end of our session. I just wanted to give a quick plug to the final event in this series, which is taking place same time next week. That is looking at something we've talked a lot about today, effective partnerships between public and private sector. So we'll be running that on the Remo platform, which for those of you who've used it before is more of a networking platform. So we'll be having fireside chats with both the public and the private sector side. And then there'll be an opportunity to network. So actually, if there are other places that you would like to network with that have been in these other events, great opportunity for you to do it there, but also to have some of those informal discussions with key individuals from the private sector side of things as well. The final point from me today is thank you very much for your time. Your feedback is really important to us. If you do have 2 minutes, can I ask you to please fill in our survey? We've just put a link to it in the chat here, and we'll send it out to you by email after this. It helps us to ensure that the content that we're creating is relevant and useful for you. We'll be asking for your suggestions within that for future topics that you would like to see as well. So please do fill that in and help us ensure that we're delivering content that is really useful to you. So that wraps up proceedings for this morning. Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you everyone for coming along. I hope you found it a useful session, and I hope to see some of you at our final session next week. Thanks everybody. Have a good day. Bye bye.